Okay, so when we're continuing with Chapter 3, the next thing that we're going to talk about is file and directory permissions. And this is going to be, there's going to be quite a bit of stuff here to unpack, so stick with me. One of the things that we've talked about in the past is when we used an ls, so where am I? Here we go. An ls-l file. We've seen a whole bunch of data here that we've said we'll figure out what that means at some point in the future. Well, it's the future. So let's go ahead and we're just going to go ahead and create a test file here. And I'm going to use that by saying touch. And because I'm not really creative, we're just going to call this file 1. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and clear the screen and then do an ls-l on file 1. And so here's what we're looking at. This is when the file was last modified, right here. The time it was last modified, the name of it. This is the size of it. It's just an empty file. And then here is what we're going to be talking about right now. When you are assigned to a Unix system or Linux system, you have by default a username. And if you type this command, it will tell you what it is. Now you probably already know that because you have this in your prompt and it's probably what you clicked on or typed in to log into the system. So hopefully this is something you know. One of the things we've sort of made passing reference into here with some of the sort of stuff that we've covered that hasn't been in the book is this idea of the sudo command, which runs something as the administrative user. So if I type sudo, who am I? It's going to actually run that as root. Okay, so it comes back here and says root. But for now, all we really care about is this thing that tells us who we are. All right. Now, that's going to correspond to this first column here. That column right there is the person that owns the file. That's the user that owns the file. So why does it have my name twice? Well, the second column means something a little bit different. What the second column means is that's the group that the file is assigned to. Now we get way into groups when we talk about the second Linux class, but what I want you guys to know is for now the whole detail that we need to know is that when you create a user, every user in Linux is assigned to particular groups, and you can tell what they are for your user if you type the command groups. And it's going to give me a list of the groups that I'm in. This first group, the first group is always the group that you're going to be in by default. All right? And then the second, sort of in no particular order, are going to be the rest of the groups that you're in. So if you type groups, it probably is going to have whatever your username is right here. And then if you remembered to check the little checkbox during the Linux install that said make this an administrative user, you're probably in the wheel group. If you didn't check that, then probably you can still log in and do stuff, but you probably can't sudo because only users that are in the wheel group can sudo. And I make pretty frequent references to to things we can do when we sudo. That's coming up in a bit. If you are not in that group, the easiest way to get administrative access is to do this. If you type su to switch user, then it's going to ask you for a password. It's going to ask you for the root password here, not your password. And when you type in a password, it looks like nothing's going to happen, but really that's fine. You're going to hit enter and voila, now you're the root user. All right, and that is the same. That's the running a command using su and then typing your commands and then going exit to get back to your user. It's going to be the same thing as doing something with sudo. That's a little bit beside the point for what we're talking about right now, but it's something that's important to know kind of as the class goes on. Okay, so the second column here is the group that that the file is associated with. And when I create a file, which I did for this one, what it's going to do by default is it's going to assign the file to me because I'm the user that created it, and then it's going to assign it to the group that I'm in, this first group that is in this list of groups right here. And since that's the same as my username, it looks like the same information is being repeated twice, but it's not really. The first thing is the user, and the second thing is the group. Now, if you do a long listing of files in some place like varlog, what you're going to see is not all the files are owned by me. In fact, most of them are owned by root. And you can see that there are actually a couple situations where the username and the group name are different. But for a lot of these, they wind up being the same thing, and that's fine. On some Linux systems, it's like this. We don't really have to worry about groups as much until we have a whole lot of users on the system. So what does this mean? What does it mean when somebody's a user, the owner of a file? Well, we're going to get into precisely how to change the behavior of that in a bit, but for now, and I'm glossing over some details that we'll get to in the next video, but just to understand the first part, what I want you guys to know is that if you're the owner of a file, you're generally going to have more permissions than somebody that is not an owner of the file. And if you're in the group that the file is owned by, you probably have some permissions, probably not as much as the owner, but probably more than somebody who's not part of the group either. So it's important to be able to know who owns what file and to fix some problems if things need to change. So what I can do, I'm going to go back to my home directory here, and let's do a long listing of file 1 again. If I wanted to change the ownership of this file to somebody else, what I could do is I could use this command that's called chown. You can see that in your little list of commands that we are using today. Chown is short for change ownership. And what we should be able to do is say chown and then give the Linux system the name of the user that we want to own that file instead of us, and then the name of the file that we want to change. All right, and so the format of this command is pretty straightforward. What I should be able to do is I should be able to say chown, and then I'm going to give it a user. I've got a couple users on this Linux system. Because I'm a Lord of the Rings fan, one of them is called Frodo Baggins, and so his username obviously is F Baggins, right? That's and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say change the ownership, give Frodo Baggins the ownership of file 1, and according to your book, this command should work. Now, probably depending on the distribution of Linux, it's going to come back and give you an error that the book did not warn you was coming, that said, hey, this is not permitted. All right, great. Thanks textbook. What's going on here? Okay. For security reasons, a lot of Linux systems don't permit you to give away your files to a different user. There are a lot of complicated reasons for this that have to do with disk quotas and potential problems with the system, but for now, don't worry about any of that stuff, because that's stuff that we don't get to until the second half of the book. We're not really worried about it now. Just be aware that as a security feature, sometimes this doesn't work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back and run this as sudo to give this file to Frodo. It's going to ask me for my password, and then when I run that, we're going to look and say, well, lo and behold, we've actually changed the user of this, the owner of this file is now Frodo. It's still in my group though, which is a little bit weird. Well, what if I want to actually change it to give it to, if I want to change the groups instead of just the user? Well, there's actually a couple ways I can do that, but probably the easiest way is to use this next command, chgrp. And this is short for change group. So what I can do here is I'm going to go chgrp. This one doesn't really have a great way to pronounce it, chgroup or something like that. And I'm going to try to give this to Frodo as well, fbaggins file 1. And then it's going to tell me that I can't do that either. So I'm going to go ahead and do this sudo right here. And then if I do an ls-l, I should be able to see that this thing belongs to Frodo, both in terms of the username and in terms of the group. Now, the other thing that I can do is I can go ahead and do both of those things in the same command. So if I want to say, if I want to get this file back to myself, I'm going to say chown, and then I'm going to give it my name, and then if I type colon, and then I give it a group name. So I could actually change this to something like this, and then give this back to file 1. Now, again, at this point, the file belongs to Frodo, so I can't just go take Frodo's file. So I actually need to sudo this as well. and then if you do something like that, you should be able to see that file 1 now belongs to me, and I've changed the group to wheel. So what I want you guys to see here is if I use something like this, I don't actually have to go back and use the change group command. I can do both of those things with chown and then give it both the username and the group name. All right, so I'm a little disappointed that the book doesn't point out that this is actually something that doesn't work if if you're not logged in as root. If you want to read some more about why those security measures are in place, I'll put a link on Blackboard if you're curious. But for now, what you need to be able to do is if you log in as root and try this kind of stuff, it should work. Because it'll let you do it if you're the root user. If you don't have sudo set up on your machine, that's fine. But that's how we can go ahead and change the ownership and the group ownership of a file. So like a lot of things that we're talking about in here, there are things that this can be done recursively. So let me give you guys an example here. I'm going to say make dir new dir, and then I'm going to cd into it, and then I'm going to touch file 1, file 2, file 3, file 4. All right, I've got a lot of files here, and if I come back, I've got something called new dir. So I'm going to go ahead and type sudo in first here, and then say chown fbaggins wheel. So we're changing both the user and the group, and new dir. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come out here to the front and type attack capital R on here. And what that should do is that should make this happen recursively. And we've talked about recursive options for a couple different commands at this point. And it works the same way for this one. So if I do an ls-l here, you can see that fbaggins and wheel are the who owns this directory. So this will work with directories too. And if I cd into new dir and do an ls-l, you can see that that recursive command actually made this change all the files inside the directory as well. All right, so that's what we're going to be that's the way that we can use chown in ch group, which doesn't really have a great abbreviation. So change owner and change group is a fine way to refer to those, or just chown and ch group is fine as well, whatever you want to say. But those are the main examples for how to use this. What I would encourage you guys to do is go ahead and use mkdir and touch to give yourself some files to play with, and try playing with this. Give it to a user, see when you have to use sudo, see if you can take it back, and all that kind of stuff. So get yourself some practice with this command. Make sure you're clear on this before we jump into the next part, because the next part's going to be a little bit out there. So, all right.